Firefighter breaks silence on what truly happened the night Princess Diana died. In the midst of glamorous Paris nights, as the lights of the Alma Tunnel still shimmered on the cold waters of the Seine River, a black Mercedes sped through the darkness carrying Princess Diana, the woman beloved by the entire world, toward the tragic end of her life. The horrific crash occurred in the early hours of August 31st, 1997, officially declared as a traffic accident caused by a driver losing control while fleeing paparazzi. But more than 2 decades have passed, and that explanation has failed to silence the countless unanswered questions. Why were all the surveillance cameras in the Alma Tunnel coincidentally turned off at the exact fateful moment? Why did emergency responders take nearly an hour to get Diana to the hospital, when the distance was just over 4 kilometers? And most disturbingly, why was it reported that the princess was still alive after the crash, only to die from blood loss on the way to the hospital, a fact that has led many international medical experts to raise serious doubts? This was no ordinary accident. Diana's death resembled the tragic final chapter of a life hunted, betrayed, and suffocated by a cold royal institution. That night did not merely claim the life of the Rose of England, but also opened a maze of truths where light has never fully reached the bottom. And in the hearts of millions, that truth to this very day remains a mystery. Paris, August 1997, when the clock struck 12:23 a.m. A shattering crash echoed through the Alma Tunnel. It was not a thunderclap of a summer night, but the sound of death calling one of the most famous women in the world, Princess Diana Spencer, just minutes after the horrific impact of the Mercedes S-280 rescue teams were dispatched to the scene. Among them was a man who would wait 27 years before he found the courage to speak, veteran firefighter Xavier Don. And his testimony did not merely stir France, it sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. In a private interview with a French investigative journalist broadcast internationally, Xavier Don, with tired eyes and a voice that seemed to whisper to history, finally said the words that had been buried in darkness for decades. She was alive, and I heard her whisper, "They planned this." Who are they? What plan? Why would a firefighter, once praised for bravery during one of France's deadliest accidents, wait nearly 3 decades to speak? That was the moment the world was forced to look back at that fateful night, not as an accident, but as a script, chillingly orchestrated to perfection. Xavier Don recounted that when he and his team reached the crushed vehicle deep inside the tunnel, the scene was chaos. People were screaming. A few paparazzi continued snapping photos, even as police shoved them back. Henri Paul, the driver, was dead on impact. Diana's lover, Dodi Al-Fayed, lay motionless. Bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones was severely injured. But Diana was not dead. She was still breathing. She whispered, very weak but still conscious. I leaned in close and heard her say a sentence, maybe unconscious, but very clear. They did this. They planned it, Xavier recalled, his face unable to hide the emotion. For 27 years, he was bound by confidentiality agreements, pressured by his superiors, and even threatened by men not in uniform who showed up just hours after the crash. They wouldn't let me write a full report. They told me to just note that the princess died en route to the hospital. Xavier paused, then continued, I can't stay silent anymore. The public deserves to know the truth. And that truth is the truly terrifying part. A British historian, Professor Jonathan Hale of Cambridge University, remarked that Xavier Don's testimony is a detonation that could shake the entire foundation of modern royal history. According to him, if Diana was indeed alive after the crash and managed to utter such a cryptic sentence, then all assumptions about an accidental traffic incident must be re-examined. We may be facing one of the largest conspiracies ever buried by royal and political powers. The question here is not just who did it, but why. At the time of her death, Diana was in a politically and personally sensitive phase. She was in love with a Muslim man, planning to marry him, and possibly have a child with Dodi Al-Fayed, a child half Windsor, half Egyptian, something the royal conservative establishment never wanted to see. And even more troubling, she was said to be holding a set of sensitive information, including evidence of human rights violations in former British-occupied regions, information she intended to reveal in a major press conference at the end of 1997. She was a ticking time bomb for Buckingham Palace. A former anonymous communications advisor revealed, Diana was no longer just a princess. She was a global voice, an independent woman loved by the whole world. And for those who believed order must be preserved, she was a greater threat than a revolution. Adding everything up, one cannot help but ask, was Diana's death the least costly option to protect the royal family's image? Each silent puzzle piece began to fall into place. The coincidental failure of surveillance cameras, the exclusion of witnesses from the investigation, the complete blame placed on driver Henri Paul, despite his blood alcohol level never having been independently verified. And now the testimony of a living witness, the first person to reach Diana when she was still alive, is the final piece. Xavier Don does not expect applause. He knows the consequences of speaking the truth may be serious, but he is old now, and he believes it is time for conscience to speak. I saw her eyes, not the eyes of someone dying, but the eyes of someone who had just realized she'd been betrayed. That sentence, colder than the wind in the Alma tunnel, made every rational mind tremble. If it is true that they planned it, as Diana said, then who are they? A group of individuals acting alone, or a well-structured system of power? And if the truth is confirmed, can the British monarchy continue to exist as a flawless symbol? The public no longer simply believes the palace's sterile statements. They have started revisiting old documents, re-examining every photo from the crash site, analyzing the words and glances of every figure who appeared in the days following the accident, and across social media platforms. The hashtag Justice for Diana has begun to resurface, like a note of defiance ringing out in the long night. 27 years is too long for silence. But some truths cannot be buried forever. As Xavier Don said, I cannot let the world continue believing a lie. She deserves to be remembered as a hero, not the victim of a vague accident. And as the lights of the Alma tunnel continue to cast their glow upon the river's surface, the unanswered questions still echo through the night. Princess Diana, the woman who once shook an entire monarchy, may have died in a crash. But her memory, and the truth behind that fateful night, will live on. After firefighter Xavier Don's shocking confession, all attention began to focus on something seemingly very ordinary, the incident report he filed in the early hours of August 31st, 1997. It wasn't a long report, but it contained a key detail that could completely change how the world views Princess Diana's death. In it, he had clearly written female victim, still breathing. Last word is, they planned this, yet when investigative journalists, historians, and forensic experts attempted to access the official records from the Paris Fire Department, they found nothing. Xavier Don's name was still listed among the night shift team, but his report had vanished. No original, no copy, no trace in the electronic archive system. It had never existed, at least, according to what the authorities claimed. And that alone sparked a public earthquake. If Diana was truly alive after the crash, if she had indeed spoken an accusation, then who decided to erase that piece of evidence? And more importantly, why? In a 3-hour interview with investigative journalist Marie Lescaut, Xavier Don described the moment he submitted his report to his superior at Forêt-Charonne. I remember his eyes very clearly. He didn't say much, just skimmed through the content and stayed my Then I was summoned to a private room. According to Don, in that dimly lit room, he was asked to revise the content of his report, removing all emotional details and focusing on the physical description of the scene. When he refused, the senior officer placed a new sheet of paper in front of him. Write it like this. Otherwise, consider yourself out of the service. It was the first time in his nearly 20-year firefighting career that Xavier Don felt he had become a part of some power game he couldn't control. And then, Soren, everything unfolded like a nightmare. The original report, which included Diana's last words, was never entered into the official file. When he deliberately kept a personal copy and revealed this to a close colleague, just a few weeks later, his apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen except the safe containing that file. No one was arrested. No investigation was launched. Just a routine burglary, according to police. Marie Lescaut, who had investigated dozens of French political scandals, remarked the deletion of a key document related to the first witness at the scene is inexplicable without interference from a very high level. It's not just lost, it's a deliberate disappearance. The press immediately took action. Le Monde called it another crack in the wall of lies surrounding Diana's death. The Guardian got straight to the point. If the truth was erased from the beginning, then what in the entire investigation can we still trust? Meanwhile, British legal expert Dr. Lawrence Miles stated, the disappearance of Xavier Don's report is an act of systemic cover-up. And once the truth is distorted from the very first step, the entire investigation loses its legal credibility. More disturbingly, not only was the report erased, but the recordings of calls from the scene to the fire department switchboard also no longer existed. Our automatic recording system wasn't working at the time, a spokesperson told the press in 1998, but according to a retired former technical employee, that was almost impossible. He said, we were trained to believe that every moment was recorded. If the system stopped working, the entire zone would be on alert. All these gaps are gradually painting a horrifying picture, a silent orchestration, where every detail and every piece of evidence was tightly controlled to reach a single conclusion that this was merely an accident. No one was held accountable, no one at fault, and no one allowed to ask questions. But now those questions can no longer be silenced. Experts began calling for the investigation file to be reopened. A petition with over 300,000 signatures was sent to the British and French parliaments. Opposition lawmakers demanded a review of the entire scene handling process, from the French side to British diplomatic representatives. However, what enraged the public the most was not the disappearance of a report, but the chilling silence from the British royal family. No statement, no response. Not a single explanation as to why the testimony of a rescue worker, the first to be at Diana's side after the crash, had never been mentioned in any hearing. That silence was seen by many as an invisible admission, and it only raised an even more terrifying question. Could it be that those at the highest levels of power ordered that erasure? A private investigator in London who had reanalyzed the case commented, the disappearance of Don's report isn't just a blind spot in the file. It's living proof that the entire truth about Princess Diana's death was twisted from the very first minute. And that has made the public no longer willing to stay quiet. People began investigating on their own, connecting the dots themselves. Forums, YouTube channels, TikTok posts about Diana's last words exploded at lightning speed. Once again, but throughout, it was the public, not the officials, who were leading the search for truth. As for Xavier Don, the man who remained silent for nearly 3 decades, he now finds himself at the center. He is not afraid. I've been threatened, lost my job, lost friends, but I still have the most precious thing, the truth. And I won't let anyone extinguish it again, like a small crack in what once seemed an invincible wall of power. Xavier Don's testimony and the disappearance of the report are beginning to expose what lies beneath. A part of history that, perhaps, someone had traded a life to keep buried, while the public was still reeling from the revelation of firefighter Xavier Don's erased report. Another detail buried for 27 years beneath layers of dusty files suddenly resurfaced, like an undercurrent sweeping away all efforts to conceal the truth. It was the black car with no license plate and the strange white paint marks. In his overlooked testimony, Xavier Don not only recorded Princess Diana's final words, but also described a haunting scene. As I approached the Mercedes, I saw in the distance on the other side of the tunnel a black car with no license plate speeding away, as if it had just left the scene at incredible speed. At the time, he assumed it was a police or French Secret Service vehicle. But when he asked his colleagues managing traffic outside, no one confirmed the presence of any such black car given permission to leave first. That car appeared and disappeared like a ghost. At the same time, another detail raised eyebrows among forensic experts: specks of white paint on the rear bumper and side of the Mercedes S80, the car that carried Princess Diana on that fateful night. Initial analysis showed it was the type of paint commonly used on older Fiat Uno models, a car widely seen in France during the 1990s. The problem was, where was that Fiat? And no one knew. No Fiat Uno was reported in an accident at that time. No security footage from the Alma tunnel, despite more than 17 cameras installed in the area, captured any such vehicle. No witnesses were officially summoned to testify about a collision with Diana's car. And most surprisingly, although the paint traces were listed in the forensic report, the official conclusion completely ignored them. British investigative expert Lord Spencer Watts commented during a 2005 conference, "You can't call a fatal collision a single vehicle accident when there are paint traces from another vehicle on the victim's car. That violates every traffic accident investigation principle." Yet that was precisely how Diana's crash was handled. Oddly, hastily, and additionally, a Magneti driver named Mark Lemoyne, who was near the Alma tunnel entrance on the night of the crash, confirmed in a statement to the press, "He saw an old white Fiat speeding out of the tunnel just seconds after I heard the impact. It looked slightly dented in front, and the rear tires skidded like it had just come out of a sharp turn." When asked why he didn't testify in the investigation, he just gave a bitter smile. "I did give a statement. But no one called me for a second interview, and my testimony never appeared in any official hearing." An anonymous intelligence analyst, formerly part of European counterintelligence, told The Spectator, "The simultaneous disappearance of two vehicles, a black car with no license plate and a white Fiat Uno, from all urban surveillance systems, despite clear physical evidence of at least one of them, is a hallmark of a high-level cover-up operation. This is not coincidence. This is orchestration. That operation, if real, was executed flawlessly, disabling surveillance cameras, eliminating witnesses, altering scene records, and above all, controlling the flow of information into mainstream media. For years, no major outlet dared to question the mysterious Fiat directly, and the black unmarked car, it had never even been mentioned in any official investigative document. Some independent sources in France reported an order to seal all electronic surveillance data around the Alma tunnel area for 3 hours after the time of the accident. But who issued that order, and under what agency's authority, remains a mystery to this day. Meanwhile, photos taken by journalists right after the crash show an unusual dark gap between frames, as if a certain area had been blurred or obscured. And amid this unprecedented thirst for truth, independent investigators began asking serious questions. Who was driving the Fiat? Who was in the unmarked black car? And why? In an accident involving the most famous woman in the world at the time, did every clue vanish as if it had never existed? The proposed theory is this: both vehicles were used in a staged crash operation. The Fiat played the role of forcing the Mercedes off course inside the tunnel. The black unmarked car served as support or surveillance, possibly belonging to some intelligence agency. Both worked in coordination, then vanished into the Paris night as if they had never been there. A former MI6 operative, speaking anonymously, once told Intelligence Review, "If there really was a plot to assassinate Princess Diana, the fastest way to do it was to make it look like an unavoidable accident. Just force the car to go too fast, pick a blind spot, take out the cameras, remove the witnesses. The rest is just an accident." And it seems that plan was executed with chilling precision. But what those behind the incident did not anticipate was this: after 27 years, the public has not forgotten. They still remember every detail, every unresolved question. They are still searching for the white Fiat, still scrutinizing each rare frame that may have captured the moments before the crash. And now, they are finding one another through millions of posts, videos, and podcasts exposing the holes in the story. The mysterious car is no longer a forgotten detail. It has become a symbol of everything that was hidden on that fateful night. And as one French journalist once wrote, sometimes justice does not come from the courts. It comes from the collective memory of a people, from the patience of those who refuse to let the truth be buried. In the heart of Paris, where the Seine still flows silently past the Alma Tunnel each day, people still stop laying flowers, lighting candles, whispering unanswered questions. And in the minds of those who once tried to erase all traces, a sound may now be echoing louder and louder, the engine of the Fiat Uno, the one they thought had vanished forever, reverberating from the depths of history. And this time, it cannot escape. While the public eye remains fixed on the mysterious Fiat Uno and the black car without a license plate that vanished as though it never existed, another question, bitter and more haunting, has begun to plague those still thirsting for justice for Princess Diana. Why did the ambulance take more than an hour just to leave the scene and bring her to the hospital? According to official time logs from French medical agencies, the crash occurred at 12:23 a.m. in the Alma Tunnel, but it was not until 1:41 that the ambulance carrying Diana arrived at the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, less than 5 kilometers away, a journey that should have taken no more than 10 minutes given the light night traffic. And yet, the ambulance at Paris took over an hour. And the worst part, during that time, Princess Diana was still alive, still conscious, still moving slightly, still able to speak. Firefighter Xavier Don was the first to detect her faint heartbeat when he opened the door of the Mercedes. After being treated at the scene, Diana was placed on a stretcher and moved into the ambulance. But instead of rushing to the hospital at full speed as every emergency protocol dictates, the ambulance stopped not once but twice along the way. The reason given: Diana showed signs of unstable blood pressure and needed to be stabilized on site before continuing. A reason that might sound reasonable until a doctor, speaking anonymously and formerly part of the French healthcare system, strongly refuted the explanation. No properly trained medical personnel would choose to stop moving in such an emergency situation. The hospital has all the necessary equipment, operating rooms, specialists, everything needed to save her. Stopping on the road in the middle of the night can only be called by one word: irrational. According to a nurse on duty that night, whose identity remains confidential for safety reasons, shortly after Diana was placed in the ambulance, a secret phone call took place between rescue personnel and unidentified individuals. After that call, the original route toward the closer Laennec Hospital, which was fully equipped for emergency care, was abandoned. Instead, they took a longer detour south to reach Pitié-Salpêtrière. The result: throughout that journey, Diana grew weaker. Her heart began to show irregular rhythms. She bled slowly but continuously from internal injuries caused by the force of the collision. And by the time the ambulance arrived at the hospital, she had fallen into a deep coma, and her heart stopped beating just minutes later. Though the medical team fought for over an hour to restart the princess's heart, in the end, and it was too late. What chills people to the core is this: if the ambulance hadn't stopped, if Diana had been taken to the nearest hospital, if there had been no mysterious call that altered the route, could she have lived? British forensic expert Dr. Harold Brunswick once stated in a 2010 research paper, the internal injuries Diana suffered were not immediately fatal. She had at least 40-50 minutes of a golden window for emergency surgery, but that opportunity was never given to her. Brunswick described Diana's case as a rare example of a completely avoidable death if everything had been handled according to protocol. The suspicion grew more unsettling when an emergency dispatch officer named Jacques P. was found to have been suddenly transferred just a few days after the crash. He was formerly in charge of supervising the ambulance coordination system in Paris and was the person who knew every movement of each emergency team on the night of August 31st, 1997. After that, he vanished from the system, with no public record remaining of his professional role. Could it be that the delay in treating Diana was not the result of chaos at the scene, but rather a deliberate act? A former European counterintelligence officer told The Point magazine, "If you want someone dead without leaving any trace of murder, delay the rescue. Let the victim die of internal injuries, no guns, no knives, no fingerprints. The death appears natural, but the outcome was programmed in advance." And if that is true, then Diana's death, mourned by the world as a tragic accident, may have been a meticulously staged play, with every minute at the scene carefully orchestrated. As for Diana, according to Xavier Don's account, she was not only alive when he reached her, but also spoke clearly. "Oh God, what's happening? They planned this." She wasn't panicked. She didn't scream, just stunned and afraid, as if she had realized the truth in that very moment, that this accident wasn't simply a skid in the dark, and that is what chills people the most. Because if the princess was lucid enough to speak the truth, then her death was no longer the end. It was the beginning of a full-scale silencing operation. When the media was told that Diana had died at the scene, they didn't know that, in reality, she had lived for hours after the crash. When millions lit candles during the funeral night, they didn't realize that much of that time she was still breathing, still had a chance to come back, to name those responsible for her condition. But that chance was stolen. Not by fate, but by the cold hands hidden behind the healthcare system, the transportation network, and the media. Hands that left no trace but controlled every second of that fateful night. And when the ambulance quietly left the Alma tunnel, not rushing out in a race against death, but crawling slowly, as if it already knew that the victim inside would never have the chance to open her eyes again, then people understood this was not an accident. This was a sentence. A predetermined ending. A silence planned in advance. And it began from the very moment the ambulance wheels did not turn faster, did not save a struggling heart, did not save the symbol of compassion and rebellion that the world had come to love. No one could have predicted that 2 years before that fateful night in the Alma tunnel, Princess Diana had left behind a chilling warning, as if she had seen the blood-stained, metallic future in advance. In 1995, on a gloomy winter night at Kensington Palace, Diana sat quietly at her writing desk, her hands trembling slightly from fear, and began to write the words that would later send shivers around the globe. In that letter, she stated that she was being watched, manipulated, and would soon be killed in a way no one would expect. "My car will have an accident orchestrated to cause serious head injury." The person she trusted completely to safeguard this letter was none other than Paul Burrell, the loyal butler who had stood by Diana for many years and witnessed firsthand the crushing isolation she endured within the royal family. He carefully locked the letter away in a private safe, only revealing it after the crash, as a final cry for help from a woman all too familiar with betrayal. But strangely, as soon as the letter was made public, Scotland Yard, the most powerful police force in the United Kingdom, immediately dismissed its value, calling it an emotional expression with no legal basis and unrelated to the cause of death. They did not reopen the investigation, did not interrogate the individuals mentioned in the letter, and did not include it in the official case file, as if the letter had never existed. Why would a document written by the victim herself, predicting her own death with eerie precision, be considered worthless? And more importantly, who stood to gain from its dismissal? Royal psychology expert Dr. Elaine Marston, who had studied Diana's behavior and psychological patterns for years, affirmed this was not merely an act of paranoia. It was the reaction of a woman living among powers far too great, too secretive, and who had too often felt the invisible hand of authority tightening around her neck. According to Dr. Marston, Diana's fear did not stem from imagination, but from actual signs: her phone being tapped, her car being followed, and even palace staff being ordered to report her every move. She wasn't hallucinating. Marston insisted. She was being hunted. That letter was not just a terrifying prophecy, it was the key to a door of unanswered questions. Diana wrote that someone wants me out of the way to clear the path for a marriage. She didn't name names, but in the context of the time when her marriage to Prince Charles was collapsing, and a woman named Camilla Parker Bowles continued to hover quietly around the throne, this someone was not hard for the public to imagine. When Paul Burrell revealed the letter in an exclusive interview with an American television network, he was harshly criticized by members of the royal family. Some accused him of profiting from past pain. Others outright called him a traitor. But Burrell gave only one reply, one that sent chills through the whole of Britain. I couldn't let Diana be killed a second time by silence. Silence, that was what surrounded Diana from the first day she entered the palace. And now, beyond, it continues to engulf the truth behind her death. No case was reopened. No individuals who may have threatened her were summoned. No one cared about the lines she left behind as a living testimony that her death had been foreseen and possibly planned. Independent investigators had tried to access the original letter to verify the handwriting, paper, and ink, but all were denied. The letter is not stored in any official investigation file. It exists only in the possession of Paul Burrell and in the memory of millions who saw the scanned copy published in international media. One more inexplicable fact, even though the letter had the potential to shake the very foundation of the monarchy, it was never publicly refuted by any member of the royal family. Not a single person from the House of Windsor denied that Diana had written those words. No one requested a retraction, and no one sued Paul Burrell for revealing it. The silence, honestly more suspicious than any denial, and it becomes even more chilling when one looks back at the truth. Diana died exactly as she had written. A car crash, a head injury, in the dead of night, with no full eyewitnesses. And most importantly, with no one held accountable. She left not only with a broken heart, but carrying with her a mystery that has never been solved. And the letter written in solitude, in fear, with the cold premonition of someone who knew she was being cornered, is her final message to the world. I saw it all coming, but I couldn't stop it. So when someone asks, was Princess Diana's death truly an accident? The answer isn't only in the Alma Tunnel or in the shattered Mercedes. It lies in every jagged stroke of ink, in every halting punctuation mark, in the breathless writing of a woman running from a fate chosen by others. And now, more than 2 decades later, that letter still has no reply. Yet with each passing day, it silently reminds the world that some truths will never rest beneath the ashes. In the official report, Henri Paul, the driver of the Mercedes carrying Princess Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed, was described as drunk, out of control, and speeding in an impaired state. It was claimed that his blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit, making him the direct cause of a global tragedy. But there's something the public was never told. The security footage taken just before the car left the Ritz Hotel showed a completely sober Henri Paul. He walked upright, communicated clearly with security staff, and most striking of all, his eyes were bright, showing no signs of intoxication. Something doesn't add up. And for those who have studied the scene of the incident, this inconsistency becomes dangerously suspicious. Another detail further fuels the wave of doubt. Henri Paul was carrying a large amount of cash on the night of the accident, an amount far exceeding the salary of a hotel security manager. According to independent investigators, especially former intelligence officer Claude Legrand, that money was no coincidence. We used to see this kind of bonus in joint operations between British and French intelligence in the 1990s. Legrand said, Henri Paul may have been a link in a larger scheme, but he didn't know that he himself was the sacrificial pawn. Skeptics believe that Henri Paul was set up, or more precisely, turned into a scapegoat, a convenient name to assign blame, a figure obscure enough that no one would dig deeper. He died at the scene, no chance to defend himself, no chance to testify, and his death was immediately used as a shield. covering up all the incomprehensible gaps in the sequence of events before and after the crash. What is frightening is not that Henri Paul was guilty. It is that someone was in such a hurry to prove he was. And when the truth is staged too perfectly, that itself becomes the clue prompting the question, was the entire crash a carefully constructed stage, with Henri Paul cast as the tragic cause, just so those truly behind the curtain would never be revealed? In the deadly game between power, intelligence, and royal secrets, sometimes the driver is not the one in control. And Henri Paul may have been just a pawn sacrificed in a bloody chess game set in motion long ago, from darkened rooms where honor and lives are bartered with covert handshakes. If the white Fiat Uno was the missing piece of the puzzle in the crash that claimed Princess Diana's life, then James Anderson was the man holding that piece. This French photographer owned a Fiat Uno that matched, with uncanny precision, the paint marks and scratches found on Diana's Mercedes. Several witnesses had reported seeing a white car leaving the scene immediately after the collision in the Alma Tunnel. And Anderson, with his shadowy ties to the paparazzi world and even to intelligence circles, quickly became a name of interest. However, before he could testify, before he had the chance to reveal any secrets, James Anderson was found burned to death in his own car in 2000 in a remote forest nearly 400 kilometers from Paris. Authorities ruled it a suicide. But independent investigators and Anderson's close friends did not believe that. No one kills themselves like that. One friend said, he was burned alive inside a car with the doors locked and the keys gone. There was no suicide note, no sign of depression, just a fire and a chilling silence that has lingered ever since. British investigative journalist Tony Gosling called Anderson's death a message written in fire, a message to anyone who ever thought about revealing the truth of that fateful night. Anderson knew something, and that made him a threat. The Fiat Uno was never found, and now, the only person who could have confirmed its existence had been incinerated. In the dark chessboard surrounding Princess Diana's death, Anderson wasn't the mastermind. He was merely someone who knew too much. And in a world where truth is paid for with blood, he paid the price in the most brutal, silent, and terrifying way. When we piece everything together, the faint last words of Diana inside the wrecked car, the eerie prophetic letter predicting her death, the suspicious delay of the ambulance, the mysterious Fiat Uno that was never found, the driver Henri Paul turned into a scapegoat, and the haunting fiery death of James Anderson, they all seem like an invisible hand guiding us toward a conclusion that cannot be ignored. This was not simply an accident. It may have been a conspiracy, a sophisticated plan, orchestrated by forces more powerful than any individual. The monarchy, intelligence, politics. Three names that always lurk in the shadows whenever someone dares to approach the truth. And Princess Diana, the woman who defied tradition, who loved outside royal ranks, who openly spoke about betrayal, and who made the world bow with compassion, may have become an intolerable thorn to those who feared change. The testimony of Xavier Don, the firefighter who last saw Diana alive, is not just a revelation. It is a voice from the past, a cry for help buried for nearly 3 decades, now echoing louder as if to awaken the conscience of humanity. Don did not speak to shock the world. He spoke because he could no longer stay silent while the truth was being forgotten. A historian once said, if history is written by the victors, then truth is what they deliberately leave behind. And perhaps, in Diana's case, that truth still remains locked behind the iron gates of power, where the light of justice has yet to reach. But no one can silence a question once it's been asked, could Diana have survived, if not for the delays, the lies, and the hidden hands pulling the strings? It is time we stop accepting cold, soulless reports, hasty conclusions lacking transparency, and the all too familiar denials from powers once deemed untouchable. It is time to reopen the questions, to rekindle memory, and to seek the truth not out of curiosity, but for justice for a woman who dared to live authentically in a world built on pretense. Diana was not just a princess, she was a symbol of compassion, resilience, and the will to rise above the boundaries of status. If we truly value that legacy, then silence is no longer an option. Keep asking questions. Keep searching. Because only when the truth is revealed can Diana truly rest in peace, not born from loneliness, but from the serenity of a symbol finally protected by the voice of the people. Justice is never too late, but it will not come unless we keep searching for it.